It's not a threat, I said. I was really hurt by you and your friends, but I'm willing to forgive you if you just pay for a meal. So leave your wallet and go. At that moment, I realized the apology was fake. Not only Susan but also Bob smirked at me. This was their plan all along. We sighed as we listened to them rant. Come on, just leave your wallet and go. You know what'll happen if you talk about this, right? Bob added. Bob is in a higher position than Mike. Hearing that, I smiled. If they were going to play dirty, I wouldn't hold back. Fine, but are you sure about this? You're gonna regret it. They thought I was bluffing and laughed. Like we care, they said. I took out my wallet and placed it on the table. They mocked me, saying, Thanks, we'll give the wallet to Mike later. Thanks for the treat. Mike clenched his fist in anger, but I stopped him. We left the room, ignoring them. Right after, we decided to take action. They would be the ones regretting this. I'm Catherine. I currently live a peaceful life with my husband Mike and our son John. I met Mike in college, and we started talking more after being paired for group projects. We shared the same hobbies and soon began dating. After graduating and working for 3 years, we got married. A few years later, we were blessed with our son. Mike works in IT sales and is highly respected at his company, but I know he struggled in the early days. He got through that tough period, and I admire him a lot. He was influenced by his family's business when he chose to go into sales. His father was involved in managing a company, and Mike aspires to be like him. I still get tough feedback, but I want to be like Dad, Mike would say. I remember getting a lot of support from my in-laws when John was born. My mother-in-law graduated from culinary school and now works as the hostess at a renowned restaurant. Her husband handles the business side of things. Their motto is, do your best at whatever you think of at the moment. I've always loved design, and alongside my administrative job, I would draw as a hobby. This hobby paid off over time as I started taking on freelance web design projects. The projects gradually got bigger. One day, Mike came to me with an idea. Hey, Catherine, the company needs a designer. Want to give it a shot? They have a few other prospects, but I really love your designs. It might get a bit busy, but I'll help out. What do you think? There's a warmth in your designs. You should try it. At first, I was unsure, but my father-in-law, who was visiting, agreed with Mike. Encouraged by their support, I decided to create a design concept. Once I committed, I was determined to do my best. I researched the product and brainstormed with Mike to find the best design approach. After some time, I crafted a design I was proud of. To my delight, my design was chosen. The product did very well in sales, and both Mike and I were thrilled when we heard the news. We thanked my in-laws for their support, and they were overjoyed as if they had succeeded themselves. Catherine, it's incredible. It's all thanks to your design. Oh, it's nothing really. Having this experience means a lot, thank you. With this turn of events, I began to invest more time in web design, which started as a side gig. Eventually, my earnings from design matched those from my day job, so I quit my administrative position and now work as a freelancer. Thanks to Mike's company, I also get the chance to design whenever they launch a new product. Our son John, who is now in middle school, has grown into a bright and kind-hearted boy. He's currently passionate about playing soccer in his school club. Life's good, but there's one thing that bothers me. Oh, Catherine, is that you? Hello. Oh, Susan, hi. It's about Susan. Her son Jake is in the same soccer club as John. John and Jake get along really well. They even ended up in the same class this year and often hang out on weekends. John frequently talks about Jake. Jake once visited our house, and he's a very polite boy. I was glad John had such a good friend. But to be honest, Susan can be quite overbearing. I first met her during the school's open house. It was clear to me from the start that she was Jake's mother. Jake, you are definitely Mama's pride and joy, she exclaimed loudly during a break when parents were talking with the students. Jake turned red and shook his head dismissively. Mom, stop, it's embarrassing. It's fine, she insisted, but it was clear Jake was uncomfortable. I remember thinking at that moment how loving Susan seemed to be, but that wasn't the reality. Really, Jake is by far the best, she said loudly. The others seemed to be just playing around during their presentation. The classroom grew momentarily silent at her words. Jake frowned slightly and responded, Didn't I tell you to stop it? Everyone took their presentation seriously. I couldn't help but wonder if her comment was really appropriate. Eventually, the parents had to leave for another meeting, so they began to exit the classroom. Mom, John called out to me, you did well in your presentation. You have club activities today, right? Yeah, he replied. Do your best. I'm going to make your favorite hamburger steak for dinner. Really? Awesome, John said. clearly excited. As he left the classroom, some of the surrounding kids told him, "Lucky you, getting hamburger steak." I felt relieved to see him handling the situation smoothly. During the parent-teacher meeting, it was open seating and we were told we could sit anywhere. I chose a seat towards the corner. That's when Susan approached and started talking to me. "Aren't you John's mother?" she asked. Huh! I was taken aback by the sudden conversation, but she ignored my surprise and sat down beside me. "I wanted to meet you. I'm Susan," she said, introducing herself. Even though I felt cornered, I listened to her, but I wondered how she knew I was John's mother when we hadn't met before, noticing my confusion. She continued, "You were talking about dinner with John earlier, right? That's how I knew, and calling hamburger steak a treat seems so laid back." I was surprised by her words. Why was she criticizing our dinner choice, especially since we just met? "John loves hamburger steak, and I don't think it's your place to comment," I replied. She looked displeased with my response. "Well, that's true," she said. "My husband works at a major company, so he doesn't quite get ordinary tastes." "What company does your husband work for?" I didn't feel like engaging with her, so I brushed her off. Luckily, the meeting started and things settled down. But right after, she asked, "Want to grab some coffee or something?" I tried to decline a few times, but she insisted, "Come on, it's just some mom friends bonding. Besides, Jake and John are good friends." Left with little choice, I agreed. We exchanged contact information and went for coffee before heading home. During our coffee chat, she boasted about her wealthy life and her husband. Since then, she invited me for coffee several times a month. Even though our kids got along well, I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed to meet her. One time, I declined her coffee invitation, and she said, "You know, my husband knows a lot of people, even John's club coach." It felt like a veiled threat, so I reluctantly kept up the friendship with Susan. What shocked me even more was discovering that Susan's husband worked at the same company as Mike. I remember nearly spitting out my drink in surprise when I found out. She had mentioned it was a major company but never said which one. I hadn't imagined it would be the same one Mike worked for. I learned this when she visited my home one day. Jake had come over to play, and Susan came to pick him up in the evening. I had hoped to just meet her at the door, but she came in since our kids were there. "Isn't your husband working for XYZ Corporation, Catherine?" she asked. I nearly choked on my tea. Seeing my shocked face, Susan seemed pleased, and I had a bad feeling about where this was headed. "Why?" "Because I saw a business card in your room with your husband's name on it, and I recognized the company name." "Hold on, are you saying you just went into our room?" "No, I didn't mean to. I was just looking for the bathroom and happened to open the wrong door." I was truly glad my son wasn't around to hear this. I had given Susan directions to the restroom, so I genuinely thought she was lying. But I had only told her verbally, so I couldn't really push back too hard. Indeed, in Mike's room, he has business cards for work. I designed the business cards for Mike's company, so there are several different types, and he had some displayed under a desk protector. She must have seen those. Stunned and at a loss for words, Susan approached and said something that surprised me even more. "I really don't like you, you know." Her previously friendly demeanor had vanished, and Susan's eyes were now sharp and piercing as she glared at me. "Do you enjoy taking work away from other people's husbands?" "Excuse me," I said, not understanding the implication of Susan's words. I just stood there, stunned. She threw out one last barb. "Well, whatever. Just remember, I'm gonna make sure you regret this." I was at a loss for words and later recounted everything to Mike. "So Bob's wife is Catherine's friend?" "It seems so," I replied. "It must be a coincidence, but she seemed to have some sort of grudge against us." "Who's this Bob guy?" Thinking a bit, Mike took a deep breath and started explaining. "I don't think it's good to discuss such things, but Bob is in the planning department. He's quite assertive and..." From what Mike explained, the product planning department shares its products with the sales team to generate revenue. Bob, who's considered a top player in the product planning department, not only holds a significant position but is also well known for a particular trait: his strong belief in meritocracy. In other words, a lot depends on whether Bob is passionate about something or not. He's quite the meritocrat, Mike added. "Some people even say it's like heaven or hell working with him." "I see, but I still don't understand why Susan hates us so much." "Yeah, I'm not sure either. I don't have a deep relationship with Bob." "Sorry for getting you involved in this mess." "It's fine, but what about John and Jake? It's not good for the kids to be so close when their parents are like this." "Yeah, I'll try to find out more about it. Thanks." A few days after our conversation, Susan reached out. Feeling anxious, I answered her call. Surprisingly, she sounded much more apologetic than usual. "I'm so sorry about the other day. I was just stressed about my husband's work not going well," she explained. I decided to hear her out since she sounded different this time. She apologized and hoped that we could get along, given that our husbands worked at the same company. "So, how about we all go out for dinner?" she suggested. Considering her previous behavior, I was hesitant, but thinking about our kids' friendship, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "That's fine, I agree. Thank you. I'll arrange the place and let you know the details later," she said, sounding pleased as she ended the call. The day arrived, and we headed to the restaurant Susan had chosen. It was a fancy place renowned for its seafood. However, even after a while, there was no sign of Susan and her husband. I tried calling her, and when I mentioned my name to the receptionist, the staff member looked concerned. "I'm sorry, but the reservation is only for 2 people," the staff member informed us. What? Mike and I were puzzled. What was going on? I asked the staff member to wait and immediately called Susan. Hello, Susan. The restaurant just told me the reservation is for 2 people." She laughed and told us to wait a moment. Soon, Susan and a man emerged. Seeing the man, Mike said, "Bob, good to see you." It was then that I realized the man was Bob. Grinning widely, Susan and Bob looked at us, and I had a bad feeling. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake with the reservation," Susan said nonchalantly. Then she said something even more shocking. "Well, mistakes happen, but let's not waste the food, right?" "What are you getting at?" I asked. Bob smirked and said, "Look, Mike, I'm soon going to be the head of the planning department. You're doing well in sales, but you're still a newbie. If you don't want things to go sour, you might want to listen to what I have to say." "Are you threatening us?" Mike asked. "It's not a threat," Bob replied. "Catherine and you have hurt me deeply. I'm offering you a way to make amends. Just leave your wallet and go." I realized that the apology was indeed a lie after all. This was their intention from the beginning. We watched as Bob and Susan continued their arrogant tirade. "Look, just leave your wallet and get out. And by the way, you do know what will happen if you tell anyone about this, right?" "Bob's higher up than Mike, after all," Susan sneered. At that, I couldn't help but smile. If they were playing it that way, there was no need to hold back anymore. "All right, but are you guys sure about this? You're going to regret it," I warned. They thought I was bluffing and burst into laughter. "Like we care," they scoffed. I took out my wallet and placed it on the table. Seeing that, the 2 of them sneered at me. "We'll give Mike his wallet back later." "Thanks for the treat, then," Bob said smugly. Mike looked furious, clenching his fists, but I calmed him down. Ignoring the 2, I left the room with Mike. We quickly took action. "They're the ones who are going to regret this," Mike muttered. "Yeah, we can't let people who pull stunts like this go unpunished," I agreed. After a while, a call came in on my phone. Recognizing the number, I answered with a smile. Catherine, looks like we're almost done here," I said, handing the phone over to Mike. After a brief exchange, Mike hung up. "Well, shall we go? It seems like things have heated up," Mike said, still looking upset. We headed back to the restaurant. Upon arriving, we asked the waiter to call the owner. Soon after, the landlady, who was also Mike's mom, hurried out. "Thank you for your help. I'm sorry for the trouble," I said. "It's fine. People like them need to be taught a lesson," Mike's mom replied, looking just as angry as Mike had earlier. We were led to a room. As we slid the door open slightly, a tense atmosphere was evident. Inside were Susan, Bob, and some senior officials from Mike's company, including his father-in-law. Now, why had it come to this? It was simple. The restaurant Susan chose happened to be the one run by Mike's mom. We realized it as soon as Susan told us to meet there. It was a coincidence, but since we were going there anyway, Mike decided to call his mom. There, it was revealed that Susan had only booked for 2. "That's right," I said, continuing the story. "We knew she hadn't made a reservation for 4, but we played along anyway. Once we understood Susan's intentions, we immediately reported it to my mother-in-law present at the restaurant. Being straightforward people, both Mike's mom and Mike reported it to his dad. That led to the current situation." "Bob, what's going on here?" a man asked Bob, clearly not amused. "Well, it's," Bob stammered, struggling to come up with an excuse. "No excuses, just tell us everything," the man demanded sternly. Bob was visibly flustered. Understandably so, as that man was Mr. Young from the planning department's top management. Next to him was someone from the sales department's upper echelon. It was obvious my father-in-law had called them over. Well, he was the former CEO, so it's understandable how he'd react if he found out his family was being treated this way, especially in his wife's restaurant by employees from when he was in charge, I thought. Right, actually, my father-in-law used to be the CEO of the company where Mike works. He's now retired and not involved in its management, but he was highly respected during his tenure. Even now, he's still in touch with company folks. After hearing the story from my mother-in-law, he immediately reached out to the company to explain the situation. When the CEO hears that one of his employees is extorting money from another employee by using their position, he's gonna come running. The two who didn't know this were surprised by the sudden appearance of the company executives at the restaurant. They seemed unable to grasp the situation fully. Mike said he wanted me to accept this, I thought, remembering his calm demeanor amidst the chaos. Yes, I was invited because my husband often works with Mike, Susan blurted out, trying to justify her actions. Even now, I was taken aback by the blatant lies coming out of their mouths. They showed no remorse, and I wondered if they didn't realize that such obvious lies would be found out. Before Bob could say more, Mike entered the room. To the astonishment of the two, Mike politely said, "Excuse me." "You!" Bob glared at Mike as soon as he saw him. We understood the situation completely, but for Susan and Bob, it must have been confusing. Before Bob could make a move, my father-in-law spoke up. "I'm the former CEO, George." He introduced himself calmly. "I'm retired now and have handed over the company to Mr. Young here. By the way, Mike is my son, but he didn't get his job at the company through any connection of mine. In fact, I wasn't involved in his hiring at all. And I should mention that this restaurant is run by my wife." Listening to my father-in-law's explanation, the two seemed to finally grasp the situation, and their faces turned pale in an instant. Susan let out an almost wordless sigh, her face flushed with a mix of shock and frustration. Bob was visibly shaking, and the situation had taken a dramatic turn. "Oh no," Susan muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked as if she couldn't believe the turn of events, more flustered than I'd ever seen her. "Let's cut the chit-chat and get down to discussing the matter at hand," said my father-in-law, his voice firm and authoritative. The discussion, or rather, the one-sided grilling, began in a heavy atmosphere. Susan and Bob struggled to find their words as they faced the stern questioning. It became clear that Susan's resentment towards me was rooted in some design work at the company. From a proposal Mike had brought up, it was evident that Susan had been another candidate considered for the project. Originally, when the project was discussed in the company, my design was chosen after a search among friends and family for talented designers. This choice boosted Mike's reputation significantly. Moreover, despite being relatively young, Mike had mastered his own sales techniques, earning the trust of his juniors and contributing to the company's performance. Susan's irritation seemed to stem from the fact that Mike had taken credit for accomplishments that were, in part, due to his wife's talents. "I personally think Mike has genuinely been working hard," I said, addressing the room, "but didn't you feel the same when you received advice from him?" The question left Bob at a loss for words. A sharp comment from a senior planning department executive further emphasized Bob's discomfort. Bob also felt slighted because the sales department would give precise advice to the planning team after completing their sales tasks, adding another layer of tension between the departments. The executives from the company and my father-in-law maintained their stern demeanor as the details of the situation unraveled, with Susan and Bob facing the consequences of their actions and the complex dynamics of workplace politics and personal vendettas. Bob's irritation was palpable. He felt that his products were being overshadowed by Mike's successes, and as Mike's answers continued to receive praise, Bob's resentment grew. He frequently vented to Susan, and their frustrations fueled their scheme against us. One day, Susan overheard me talking about my work with some other moms. I shared my passion for designing and mentioned how I often drew illustrations for school events like PTA meetings. Some of the moms knew I worked freelance, and when Susan learned that I was the designer chosen for the company project, she began picking on me, driven by jealousy. As the details of their scheme were revealed, we were left speechless and astounded by the lengths they had gone to out of sheer envy. The situation was more intricate than we had initially realized. Another shocking truth emerged as the conversation with Mr. Young continued. Bob was caught off guard when Mr. Young coldly said, "I've heard from one of our planning department guys. I hope it's not true, but there's a significant amount of money being spent on planning. Is it really all going towards actual products?" Bob froze and Susan went pale. It became evident that their scheme had not only targeted us personally, but had also involved questionable financial practices within the company. Their deceit was not just a matter of personal vendetta, but extended into serious concerns about misuse of company funds. The gravity of the situation settled in as we watched Bob and Susan struggle to respond. The repercussions of their actions were far-reaching, and the consequences of their jealousy and scheming were becoming increasingly clear. Bob had been stealing money from the company while pretending it was for expenses. This shocking discovery surprised everyone. It also turned out that Susan was involved in the scheme. When Bob was confronted, he got angry and shouted back, revealing his guilt. He looked like someone who had accidentally admitted to stealing, but it was too late. Mr. Young, Bob's father-in-law, apologized, saying he didn't expect such a thing to happen in a company he trusted. He took responsibility for not supervising better. However, Mr. Young was told it wasn't his fault but rather the couple's for their dishonesty. They were both going to face consequences for their actions. Bob and Susan argued, with Bob blaming Susan and Susan blaming Bob. The argument escalated, and Mr. Young decided to call the police. The situation caused a big disturbance in the store, but Bob's mother handled it with dignity, and things were soon brought under control. Mike later told me that Bob was fired from his job and was sued by the company. The company took strict action against him because his actions involved their products. Jake was taken in by Susan's parents for a while after the incident. Susan's parents came over to apologize. I heard that the couple is now living quietly, possibly as a way to make up for their actions. I wondered how things turned out this way for them, especially since Susan's parents seemed so sincere. I was worried about Jake, but the company made sure the incident didn't get out, so no rumors spread at his school, and he was okay. It's unfortunate what happened to Jake, but I talked to John recently, and Jake is doing well at school. He's a good kid, and people trust him. Instead of being upset with his parents, he seems more angry at them. It's good to hear that Jake is doing fine. I haven't seen Susan and Bob since the incident, but Jake still hangs out with John and occasionally visits us. Watching them play happily makes me hope that they won't face the same troubles we did. We were lucky this time, but I truly believe that our actions shape our lives and relationships. I want to value my relationships with others even more now.